All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Junto, the talk show where we are exploring the situation that we find ourselves in and how to live in it and how to not just go along with a culture that is very anti-life and would have us, I don't know, hollow ourselves out until the day that we actually die. Try to make us die before we actually die. So, thanks for tuning in. I will not be here for the rest of the week. And then next week, my sleep schedule will be reset and I can get back into 4 days a week, 9 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. All right. So, yeah. Today, we are going to talk about, I titled the show, Binding the Imaginary to the Real. And before, I guess I'll explain how I came to decide to want to talk about this today. The other day, I was just in my room and getting ready for bed, and I just had one of those good moments, I guess, where I remember that I'm a bookseller and I have lots of books, and sometimes they will just feel, sometimes I will be dull to that and they will just feel like objects that are not super interesting. Like if I'm distracted or preoccupied by other things in my life, if I'm feeling like, I don't know, I don't want to use the word depressed, but just sort of like distracted and not in control of, I don't know, not focused on what's important, I guess. Then I can kind of forget that they're there. I'll just be trapped in my head. But the other day I remembered that, I read a little bit every day, but I remembered that there's so much interesting stuff in here that I've not gotten the chance to look at and actually read for myself. And I picked up a book it's the Puritan Source Book that was put together by Perry Miller and Thomas H. Johnson. So it's a bunch of primary source writings of Puritans who came over and lived in Massachusetts during the colonial era. And yeah, so I looked through the table of contents to find something that might be interesting, and I found something about meditation in here. And I barely got 2 pages into it before I had to just kind of put it down and write about my thoughts, because I've read a few things in this book before and they've been interesting, but that just, the other night when I was encountering this again, it made things click for me differently, where I started thinking a little bit more about how little I know about the Puritans and how little, I don't know, I was just thinking about how history trickles down to us. And we have notions of our history, or notions of it, it doesn't need to be connected to us in any way, just notions of global history. And in a sense, it is all ours because we're all here on the globe. It all is of significance. So I don't mean just because I'm in the United States that the Puritan is a history here that is related to my own heritage. But anyway, just all of these conceptualizations that we use to make sense of where we are, I think that's what I'm describing when I refer to the imaginary in the title of this video, binding the imaginary to the real, because we have this, I want to emphasize the root image in imaginary, because we have pictures of how history plays out, and a lot of those pictures actually even just straight up come from movies, or since we're thinking about early US history, like I remember seeing Mel Gibson's The Patriot when I was a kid, and that really formed my sense of what it looked like, what it was like what the fashion was, how people spoke to each other, or like what the combat was like. And those images, like I can still bring to mind some actors in that movie. I can still see people interacting with each other, or like sitting at a campfire and like melting down like iron toys to use as musket balls, which I I don't know. I feel like I read at one point, like then years later, as like a younger adult, that's just made up, or that's just like it wouldn't work like that. Anyway, but it forms this image that I have, and that specific image, whether it's real or not, or whether it is accurate or not, it's certainly not real. It is necessarily distant from what happened. That's kind of where I'm going with all this. That's why I say binding. We're trying to find ways to tie our imagined conceptions of things onto what actually has transpired and created the world that we live in. And we can't actually make it correspond to reality as it was lived. Maybe an instructive example is we can't even understand the reality of any one other person on the planet, even if they are our spouse or our best friend or our parent or our child. The depth of the internal human experience is it's just so deep and so broad and so unique that we will never really understand even one other person for a moment. And that's not to say that we can't understand why they did something, or we can't guess why they did something and be right about it. Even if they're denying it, we could maybe have a better sense of why they did something than they did. I think that's all plausible, but that's different from what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at here is what really necessarily transpires in the reality of that person's existence that causes them to experience, basically, and to act. So just to set up some guardrails here, it's like we can't actually transcend and be totally sure. So to bring that around to the movie example again, though, like, say, I don't really even remember the plot of that movie. It could be totally fictionalized. I don't know who the characters are, but I mean, I remember the plot vaguely, but I don't know, because it's the American Revolution, but I don't know if they were just kind of riffing or what. However, say they were using an actual historical figure as the basis of that. Well, most historical figures, maybe not most historical figures, but many of the historical figures, at least in the past 500 years that we know of them because they were writers. And other ones we know of because they were written about, or because there was art made about them, because their influence was visible on the material world. But there's many people where they actually directly took, or they acted in such a way where they were taking their internal experience and affecting the material world by writing words on pages in order to specifically try to get someone to understand something that they thought. So I'm going to emphasize, I bring it up because I want to emphasize that those sorts of primary source documents that come from the actual individuals are just of inordinate, very special significance for making sense of history, but also for making sense of other people. To bring it back to that other example too, where say you don't really, and say it is someone you're close to, a best friend or something, you don't really understand why they did something. Well, one way to do that would be to converse with them, or maybe they write you a letter, or they explain in some way where they are specifically trying to release that knowledge that they have for you as an audience and get you to understand it. So anyway, that's just kind of the lay of the land that I want to create here. And so that was inspired by me taking a look at this Puritan book, and I have a much deeper sense of Christianity now than I did at any other time in my life. So reading this little bit about meditation, which is quoting scripture, I was able to have a better sense of what they meant or what they might have meant. So if I had read this, say, 5 years ago, I would be missing a whole lot of stuff that they would be presuming I would understand. They are presuming that I am, like, whoever was writing this, he was writing it for his community, presumably, on meditation. And in his community, you could safely assume that everyone was familiar with the scriptures. And then I'm just reading it 400 years later without that deep knowledge of any of that, just a very tenuous grasp of basic scriptural analysis. I forgot how I started this statement, but basically the point is I am now approaching this and am better able to read it. I'm better able to get a sense. So say I read it in high school or something, and people rag on the Puritans. I don't know a ton about them. I'm only just starting to read the Puritan source book. So, like, the point is, you read things, we all make assumptions about what someone is saying and about what people are doing. We all make a lot of assumptions all the time in our current culture, especially, maybe now more than ever, because of how language has evolved with the newest media technologies. Language gets very flat. It becomes very, I want to say, commodified, because it all becomes uniform and used in a certain manner of exchange, or like even just to say LMAO or something as a response. It's like, well, I know this will be interpreted in a certain way. It's like you go in the LMAO drawer and you just take it out and you apply it to all these situations where it could work. And it doesn't have to be just abbreviations like that. It could be full statements. Like much earlier on in the show, we talked about, I overheard someone saying to a friend as she walked by this, like, maybe the most interesting building in this area. And she said, I like that door. And it resembled to me an Instagram post, because that was the whole conversation, or like interacting with an Instagram post where it's like, oh, I like that. You get really used to just expressing yourself through the interfaces of the social media that you use all the time. So, yeah. One moment, just going to check something. All right. The stream is healthy, according to YouTube. So yeah, I just want to draw attention to this reflex that is getting really hammered into all of us culturally, where we think we are interpreting something properly, whether it be a book or current events, or what someone is saying and what they're saying reveals about them. And that relates to that concept of virtue signaling, where it's like a lot of people are making statements for the sake of an in-crowd, out-crowd identification, where it's more about getting into the club than knowing what you're talking about remotely at all. So anyway, yeah, I guess I'll read two little things real quick that I set aside here from the Tao Te Ching. They're 52 and 56. Verse 52, verse 56, I think. All right. And, well, I wonder which one's better to go right off of that note. Okay, well, yeah, so with that one thing in mind, like how our language is devolving and becoming very flat and very utilitarian. Like we're just sort of using it for ends instead of trying to use it as a means to understanding the world or each other or what we ought to be doing. So this is 56. He who knows not, or sorry, he who knows speaks not. He who speaks knows not. He closes the mouth. He shuts the doors of the senses. He subdues activities. He is free from bonds. He diffuses light. He gathers men into unity. This is called wonderful unity. Favor and disgrace do not touch him. Profit and loss do not affect him. Honor and shame are alike to him. Therefore, he is held in esteem by all men. And I will elaborate more at the end of this episode on that, but I just kind of want to keep it in mind, this concept of like engaging versus not engaging is an element here. Like shutting the doors of the senses, closing the mouth, finding this way to then start to diffuse light and gather men into unity and create a wonderful unity. It doesn't come from just noisy conversation, I guess. And one moment. Yeah. All right, and then there's another one, 52, in here. And this relates a little bit more to what I was saying with the historical context. So the beginning of the universe is the mother of all things. Knowing the mother, one also knows the sons. Knowing the sons, yet remaining in touch with the mother, brings freedom from the fear of death. Keep your mouth shut, guard the senses, and life is ever full. Open your mouth, always be busy, and life is beyond hope. Seeing the small is insight, yielding to force is strength. Using the outer light, return to insight, and in this way be saved from harm. This is learning constancy. And that concept of knowing the mother of the universe and knowing its children and like knowing the sons yet remaining in touch with the mother brings freedom from the fear of death. I think this is a useful historical principle as well, where when you read those primary sources from all of these eras and you also see who's writing the secondary sources, who's writing the tertiary sources, who's putting them into the schools, how are you molding the historical narrative that a nation maintains about itself? How does it change over time? You need to know the mother to know the sons. You can't just start here and think you have any idea what's going on, especially in our particular situation. I mean, in our particular situation, I like the intensity of the translation in this other one. I won't read the whole thing, but follow the light, you will reflect its radiance. Neglect the inner life, your body will meet with calamity. This is called the eternal heritage. That's the ending of the same verse. So yeah, so I guess that's where I'm building up to from here is now in our particular situation, I feel like we really are going to be met with calamity if we neglect the inner life and neglect that rule of eternal heritage where we understand how history forms the present and how little understanding we will ever have of the present if we maintain this shallow form of language, whether we're reading or talking to each other or seeing things or acting in the world, and even just to discern our own intentions. Like, language is very deep within our psyche. So even just to think we're desiring certain things, this is something that can be molded and affected by language. So I think let me just take a look. Okay. Yeah, so with that as the backdrop, we're thinking about how we imagine history, how we imagine other people, how we communicate with other people, how we read historical texts or any texts, how we conceive of what we believe to be true about the world or what our virtues are or what we think of current events or the news or what we think our society ought to embrace or get rid of. With all that as a backdrop, I just want to... I won't get into this because the whole show is about this, where I just think of our current situation as, well, current is how I think of it. I think of it as like an intense current in a shallow river. So relatively shallow. Like imagine a river that you could cross without your head ever going underwater. And but the current is extremely strong. Obviously, all the rocks on the ground are really slippery and invisible. You can't see them. So I think, and so where is that bringing us? It is, we're hardly in control of where it is bringing us, and it's changing how we interact with each other. It's changing how we conceive of simply everything. I think it. Sorry, I'm just synthesizing on the spot here because this is something that just kind of was rolling around in my head, and I'm talking as a means to get it out and see if anyone understands. Okay, so maybe the way to elucidate what I mean is to, maybe the best way to do that is to talk about how I think we can reclaim some agency in this current, because we're all born in this. For generations and generations, this has been a very untenable and dangerous technological situation. And when I say dangerous, I mean it is politically dangerous. There are dangerous political implications for our society being so inundated with the particular media technologies who are owned by the particular corporations that own them. It's a nightmare. So with that in mind, that's the river that we're getting pulled down and down and down. And I guess the ocean that it empties out into eventually is perhaps death, but maybe it's more like the death of humanity, or the death of the possibility, which is so fundamental to what human existence is. It's about possibility and choice. And we see these trends over the past 100 years of really trying to eliminate choice, trying to predict what someone would do algorithmically. This is like how advertising works. It takes information about you and it presents you with things that it thinks you will engage with. So it's trying to get you to behave in certain ways. You can kind of look at the whole past 100 years as an increasingly intense attempt to get people to behave in certain ways. And whether this was the intention or not, these linguistic effects are downstream from that. And it actually, because of the linguistic shallowing that occurs, we become much more ever increasingly manipulable, ever increasingly simpler to get to act in those ways that are conducive for, say, the owners of society, or say just like those who have the most world building power in our world is one way that I think of it, because we are not evenly distributed on the planet. We're not equal really in any way, except that we are all human, and there's implications from that. But we are ultimately all differentiable. We are all separate. We are singular human beings. And when we are born and as we grow up, we develop in certain ways, and we are existing in particular locations in the social strata where we are only capable of so much. And some people in this world have immense world building or world changing ability. They have the resources and the position and the molded intents to do that kind of thing. Most people watching this, I think, are lower on the spectrum than that. And yet, even on that spectrum, because of the developments of technology, say 100 years ago, I wouldn't be able to reach as many people with a talk show like this as I'm able to now. I think the landscape is constantly evolving, and it's not necessarily toward total domination of the human spirit. I think we have to look for the potential this is the strategic part of the show. It's like we have to understand where we are and look for the potential in our particular situation, being the particular people that we are, to change what is transpiring in the world, to create certain cultures that allow a more dignified mode of human life to exist on the planet and sustain itself on the planet against these really inhuman and evil forces. All right. So anyway, that was just me trying to describe, trying to imagine maybe where this current is bringing us, what the ocean represents. And I think the ocean represents like this concept of, I mean, there's lots of nightmare scenarios. There's nuclear wars. There's all kinds of stuff. But one that is perhaps least calamitous in the outward way is this closing of the mind, basically, where people become duller and duller and duller, and their souls become just like, it's like you almost extinguish the soul. It's not able to comprehend very much or act very much in the world, and yet we're all still human. So just to foreclose human existence like that to the point where it is almost entirely controlled and really undignified, and that's maybe the worst case scenario, other than I don't know. I mean, I try not to, there's not really too much point in ranking horrible end of the world scenarios. But we have to reckon with what is actually transpiring and what we can actually see in the world around us and what we have power to change. Because I think all of us actually, anyone watching this, I think has a very significant, relatively very significant power to affect the world. And that is something that is really, through the development of our cultural mythology, and also the regimentation of the minds and actions of people, it is sort of snuck out the back door so that we do nothing, and thus we, without knowing it, are consenting and propping up, actually taking we're actively propping up the things that we find so negative about our current societal situation. Anyway, so like I said, it's not like we're on one side of the river and we have to figure out how to get across. We're born in the river. So step one, I think, at least, and I'm talking about people who are in a similar technological situation to me, people who have smartphones, and I mean, like, the culture in the United States is horrific at this point. It is like so extreme. I don't know. I just heard from a friend who moved to Canada, or just like a rural, kind of out there part of Canada, and we were catching up, and yeah, I don't know, even that, where it's just like really not that different. Like, the work culture is different, the relationship to the winter is different, the relationship to like what you're trying to do with your life is different. It's just kind of more chill and less neurotic and psycho. And anyway, so yeah, I'm talking to people who live in my neurotic psycho world, and I think the thing you have to do is basically or just to keep using this metaphor, because I find it kind of useful. I didn't think of it till earlier, but like, you have to get out of the water. Step number one. And I don't know if you've ever been in a river where there's some current, but it's an exhausting situation, and you're just so it's not even like about like getting out and standing up. There's kind of this gradual, like, oh, I need to just like hang on to like one rock for a long time, and then I can like maybe get most of my body onto the ground, and then I'll like lay there for a day, and then eventually I'll stand up, and then, oh, I have to like actually like regain range of motion. I have to strengthen myself. I have to actually like get my body to work again, because I'm no longer in this current that I grew up in, and there's all these parts of my existence that I barely even knew were there, and it's like I have to climb a tree and make a fire or whatever. But ultimately, the goal, unfortunately, the goal is not to get out of the river. And that's like something you do kind of see with people who are like just like more primitivist or collectivist, like, oh, I'm just gonna like be self-sufficient out there in the middle of nowhere. And that's not, I don't think that's inherently wrong, but I don't think it's a solution, because ultimately, well, there's lots of reasons. Some of which are you can just get killed out there eventually. Like you're not protecting yourself from the world, and you're not changing the world necessarily, depending on the work that you're doing. But anyway, and I don't know, it's a tangent, but I'm always kind of hesitant to even talk about changing the world, because I think I'm a very like anti-utopian person. Like I don't believe in utopia at all. And I think there are inherent issues with the world. However, so when I'm talking about changing the world, I'm not talking about getting to la epic utopia. I'm just talking about like we are all changing the world all the time. Like I'm picking this up and putting it down. That's more what I mean by changing the world. And I mean changing it for the better in all those minor ways, using the myriad decisions that we make every day for something good instead of complacency. So anyway, yeah, I'm kind of summarizing a whole lot of things in that, like, okay, well, I'm out of the river and I need to get jacked now. And like, but the goal is to, not just to live in that little utopia, so to speak. Like it's, you then have to go cross the river. You actually just have to get like really good at being in the river and being in the world and not getting caught by the current. So that's the hard part. And that's the part that, I mean, it all takes practice. Ultimately, it all is a matter of strengthening oneself and discovering things about oneself, expanding things about one's mind. But anyway, so one way to just get out of the river, I've talked about this before, but is the concept of fasting. And I don't mean fasting from food necessarily, although that can play a role and can be very important depending on your situation. But more a type of actual, at least temporary, rejection of all of the things that have been developed as norms for you, and a comfort with getting alone, sort of like a way to feel comfortable being alive in this situation without all of the distractions, whether those distractions are social or solitary. Like maybe you just have to, maybe you're comfortable being solitary, but you ultimately are always doing some activity in order to pass the time. Anyway, I just imagine the necessity to ultimately just stop moving down this river at any cost. And, well, not at any cost, but by whatever means are possible and reasonable for you in particular. And that, I think, to connect it to something we talk about, like most people use phones, have been using every phone, most people have been using a phone every day for years now. There are many people where they have not taken a day off, except maybe by accident or under a very special circumstance. That's fucking weird. People should, you should have some sense of what it's like to go a day on the earth without the phone. And yet it's becoming so normal to just check it every day. In fact, I mean, I really think you should spend a day of the week without it. Because, am I crazy, or does that not just seem like so obviously damaging to do to yourself? Because you're just becoming someone else. You're becoming you who uses the phone every day instead of whoever you were before that, or whoever you would be without that. And again, I think phones are useful tools. I don't have to, relitigate everything every time here, but it's still early and a lot of people are still just kind of finding the show. But anyway, so yeah, I will now talk about, say you can break some of those bad habits and you can separate yourself from those things long enough to know who you are. You're journaling, you're making sense of your internal mind, you're making sense of the way that you are and the things that you want. I will connect this now to this Puritan example again, where like it's not just us, and it's not just us needing to separate ourselves out and make sense. There's the whole arc of history that has brought us to this particular moment. And we have available at our fingertips a vast array of information. And also now we have available at our fingertips AI information technology, which could, in theory, summarize that for all of us. And I don't encourage that type of use of it, except in special circumstances. So with this primary source stuff, I think we just have an obligation to try to understand the world that we live in and how it came to be. And you can't do that without getting good at reading and getting good at communicating. Basically getting good at thinking and conceptualizing, whether it be linguistic or not. There's a whole interior world that it is of utmost importance that you start developing right now and stop atrophying at all costs. It's like that is, I mean, I don't want to, it's a stupid way of saying it, but like that's the currency for the rest of your life. And you have what you have of it right now. I remember a friend when he was getting into fitness, he was like, well, I heard, I don't know, at this certain point, you only have so much muscle and you're not going to regain it when you're elderly, and you kind of are just like timing it out. So if I get, relatively strong, or at least stronger than I am, by the time I get to that point, I will have my mobility for however long. I don't know much about that. I might not even be representing what he was saying to me well or accurately. However, that is true of your mind. Or there's an analogous truth for the mind, which is we have this interior world within us, and we can either be making decisions when we make our huge list of decisions every day. We do so many things every day. We decide so many things every day, even if they're banal. We are either deciding to reduce or gear towards something bad for us, that interior world that we have. We're either reducing it or we are enriching it. We're either strengthening it or we're weakening it. And when I say it's hard to even talk about it because it's such a multiplicity of things in there. Like it's, after all, it even relates to all your movement in the world. It's like everything's coming back to the mind. It's not just, about reading. It's about all of your senses, and not just exterior senses. It's about interior senses and making sense of the things that arise in your imagination or desires that arise in your mind. So yeah, once you're out of the water, once you're able to separate yourself enough from that current and you're at least not getting carried away, it is all about increasing the potential of your interior mind, developing your attention and concentration, and until the point where you can really consider yourself a collected person. Like you have what you have and you're aware of it and you are acting with intention, and you're not just getting carried away or distracted or frustrated by the things that you're trying to do in the world. And this really goes for everybody. I could be talking to high schoolers or elderly people, with this, and everyone in between, and children as well. I mean, I hate to see children with phones, especially like unrestricted phone use. It's like that is straight up child abuse. I will, if eventually I'll probably lay that out into an argument on paper, but like, you know, I'm willing to defend that position. That is seriously bad for the child, and it shows how far people are from understanding what they even are. Like, people have such a sad view of what their place is in the world if when they have children and create like new life, it's like, wow, this is new life, and I'm going to, there's just no respect. It's like there's no admiration for what life is at that point. You're just like, okay, well, this is new life, and that means nothing. That's what it looks like to me. So, and it's not to say people don't care about their kids, but it's a spectrum. Like, people don't understand what care is. People can think they hate the society and uphold it with every decision they make every day. Look at the left. That's like what it is. So, yeah. Anyway. So I guess I'll get a little bit more specific, and then we can call it. All right. So the way I think of this, like, I don't like, I don't even really like sharing this with people, but this is how I think of it in my head, because it sounds kind of like hack-y, or like sort of like life hack, sort of like Instagram guru or something, but it's just straight up the way that I think of it. So, like, I think of these sort of, well, yeah, first I'll just talk about grounding in general, because that's kind of what I mean by getting out of the water, getting out of the current, and regaining your whole field of motion. Like, finding out that life isn't just being in the water. Life is actually like living this whole range of experiences, this whole range of possibilities that you get to choose. That's kind of what I think of as grounding. That is just learning what the possibility is. And then the strengthening of oneself, getting ready to go try to cross that river, like, which requires extreme strength and sensitivity. Like, you'd have to be feeling the rocks with your feet and just like holding your body in such specific ways for the current to not carry you away. So that sort of strengthening that happens afterwards is just to live a life that is grounded, where you're making decisions that actually are aligning you with the things that you find most important in life. That is a gradual practice on top of that. So anyway, I think of these three pillars of groundedness, because once I stopped being depressed, I was extremely depressed for a lot of my 20s. I was trying to reflect on it and trying to write sort of a depression guide. And out of it came this sort of sense that I had. So, or this way of looking at things. So, I don't know. I kind of wish I had a visual aid. At some point, I'll get a little more elaborate with what I bother with on the live stream, but I don't know how to do that yet, or it's just not set up yet. So, anyway, these pillars are things that I realized over time I was grounding myself with. They were things I was building up so that I could actually maintain some sort of self-sovereignty, is how I thought of it. Like some sort of actual alignment. Like I was able to align myself with what I wanted to do in the world, and I could create that in the world. I could do it, and I could make sense of it. So in order to have that, I just imagine these three pillars need to be built, and you put a floor on top of them, and then that's where you're able to live. That's where a free life comes from. That's sort of my concept of freedom. And so those pillars are a sense of groundedness with respect to being, and so I phrase this a whole bunch of different ways to different people. I see it as God, or like a relationship to God, but there's a relationship to being or nature, capital B being, like human existence, like the existential quality of being conscious as a human on the planet. And that's something I see that can be developed through that sort of fasting, where you are like, you separate yourself from all these things that are taking you away from yourself, like social obligations, or, and I'm not saying, get rid of all your social obligations, but just by slowing down and separating all the reflexive things you might do, the things you would just like do as a reflex, like this happens, oh, I'm going to do that. Like there's so much of that in our lives where it's just kind of like reflexive moving through life. Anyway, another one for me, which was extremely important as well when I was depressed, it was I was just making sense of my concrete existence. So that first thing has more to do with everybody. It's sort of an existential question. It's about the human condition. It's about God. It's about being. However, we're all unique. And I think we all have to reckon with the unique things about us. And we have to make sense of, like, psychologically, who am I? Like, what are these drives, and like, where did they come from? And what are these things? Like, if I sabotage myself in certain ways, if I hold myself back from being really the best version of myself, like, where's that coming from? There was a whole, over those years of being depressed, like a whole process of understanding my childhood and then significant relationships in my adolescence, and just developing a language for understanding interior experience, understanding the psyche, understanding how things move in there, how memory functions, how knowledge functions, how beliefs function. All of that is, and there's obviously shared territory there. I would be screwed if I couldn't read books that were helping me do that. There were books that were helping me understand and make sense of that experience. And, they weren't written by me. They're just written by people who were in a more or less similar enough situation. But ultimately, it all came down to my concrete personhood and how I was born of my parents, and I was born into my family, and I was born in this location, in this society with a particular history. And my parents were born of their parents. And all of this creates I don't even know what to call it, but it's I don't know, it's like a whole solar system around the consciousness that you are. So that's another type of grounding oneself. And then the last one came to me last, which was, and that kind of is the order that I understood these things over the course of my life. Although, they don't get fully developed. You don't build one all the way to the top. Like, I only recently have had more significant changes in my religious beliefs, but they aren't really that different. I'm just understanding them a little bit differently. A lot of it has had a through line through all of this. So anyway, but this last one came last, and it's making sense of the cultural historical position that we exist in. So I always was a big critique of the norms of our society since I was like a teenager, and because it just seemed so fake and horrible. And so that was sort of a cultural critique that I had. And then I started to think about, or at one point in my life, I started to develop further the historical contingency on which our cultural structure sits. And I started to think more about grounding these critiques in the historical, concrete events that brought them about. And not just major events. When I say event, I mean, I don't know, like event for me always evokes this one like space-time book that I read where it's like an event is an idealized point in space and time. And that's not what I mean, but it is so deep in my brain. And but that is almost what I mean. If it is not a literal idealized point, if it has extension in space and time, extension in space and time, that's more what I mean by an event, and that could be extended quite far, or it could just have to do with someone's desire to act in a certain way, and then they do that action, and that, history is just, it's all about these actions and the intentions behind them. But really, more than anything, the whatever the actions actually are that transpire. Anyway, so I think some people can, like, for example, I stopped being depressed before I really got more interested in the concept of cultural historical grounding. And but there was groundwork that had always been there, and it just wasn't enough. It was mostly cultural. And I really, until I started taking a deeper look at history, I I would always be lost if I never started doing that. So I don't know. I'm not saying the system is complete, but it seemed pretty darn good for me. And it really helped me get back on my feet and also become more capable as a person. So anyway, that's maybe that's all she wrote. I mean, I could keep going, but I feel like that's kind of solid. So there's this, I guess, just to wrap it all back around, I was reading this Puritans book, and I just was thinking to myself, like, this is so deep when I consider the experiences that this person must have been having that brought him to write this. I was really trying to empathize with the author, and he's talking about meditative experiences. And it's like, I think in our shallow culture, we hear people say things and we're just like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, like, just, I get it. Sure, I get it. And so you read something like this to someone and it might be like, sure, yeah, like, I get what he's saying. But unless you have similar experiences, you don't get what he's saying. And you really ought not say that you do. It's okay. We're never going to really get what anybody's saying. I mean, we can get a lot out of it, but it's like, I'm never literally in someone else's shoes. And the cultural norm at this point is to be like, oh yeah, I'm in his shoes. Like, I get it. It's just to be like, oh yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. And it's like, you don't. So I don't know. I guess I'll read like just the couple paragraphs that I read where I was just getting triggered, because in Massachusetts, they here's okay, so I'm from Massachusetts, and on the highways here, or at least on the interstate, they'll have, how if you're in the US and you've driven around, like, every state has a different state highway sign, and they'll put, like, maybe it'll be in the shape of the state. I don't really know what other states do off the top of my head, but in Massachusetts, at least on some of them, they have this symbol, which is the like top hat with a buckle on it, if you're familiar. And that this is a symbol associated, I guess, I don't know if it's exactly associated with Puritans or just Pilgrims in general. But okay, so the whole decision was created and the manufacturing process was gone through, and everyone put up these signs, and they've been up for years. And those hats just have never existed. Those hats are an artistic construction from probably like 100 years later. I didn't look into it again, but I've looked into it in the past, and it's like, they were actually not wearing hats with buckles on them. And it's like, dog, like, we don't know anything. Like, we're being raised in Massachusetts, and they are like putting that on the signs. It's just like a deliberate, like, total rejection of historical truth, or just like interest in even, like, I don't know, trying to have any awareness. Oh man. Anyway, though. So yeah, I was reading this and I was triggered, because I was just like, I just started thinking about, like, well, what do I know about, the early settlers? And it was like, buckle hat. Yeah, that shit sucks. So Anyway, the way this is written, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's a little essay called Meditation, and the author is Thomas Hooker, and sorry, it's kind of not actually presented in the, okay, yeah. He was born 1586 and died 1674. For context. And yeah, so it's written as what he writes one sentence, and then the whole essay is him breaking down the sentence, which is very nice. And so he says, here is the main sentence. Meditation is a serious intention of the mind, whereby we come to search out the truth and settle it effectually upon the heart. And to connect that to how someone may read it in our contemporary society, like, you may, and I mean, I'm guilty of this. I am one of these people who is learning increasingly to develop an appreciation for the depth that language brings us in our interior lives. And that, not only that it brings us, it doesn't bring it to us automatically. We need to bring it onto what we're reading. And that requires muscles that are totally atrophied, totally weak. And it's exhausting to try to get them back. You have to do a lot of intentional reading where you're intentionally exploring different kinds of reading. So anyway, yeah, someone might just kind of be like, yeah, a serious intention of the mind whereby we come to search out the truth and settle it effectually upon the heart. And someone might just kind of agree with that as a concept for meditation. But then he goes on to take even just like word by word at times, he'll expand it into a paragraph. Like he takes the word serious and then he elaborates on it. So I'll just read the first couple. An intention of the mind. When one puts forth the strength of their understanding about the work in hand, takes it as an especial task whereabout the heart should be taken up, and that which will require the whole man, and that to the bent of the best ability he hath, so the word is used. Thou shalt not suffer the word to depart out of thy mind, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night. When either the word would depart away or our corruptions would drive it away, meditation lays hold upon it and will not let it go, but exerciseth the strength of the attention of his thoughts about it, makes a business of it as that about which he might do his best, and yet falls short of what he should do in it. So David, when he would discover where the stream and overflowing strength of his affections vented themselves, he points out this practice as that which employs the mind to the full. Psalm 119, Oh, how I love thy law, it is my meditation all the day. Love is the great wheel of the soul that sets all on going. And how doth that appear? It is my meditation day and night. The word in the original signifieth to swim. A man spreads the breadth of his understanding about that work, and lays out himself about the service wherein there is both difficulty and worth. I feel like this essay was kind of the perfect thing to stumble upon to get me to start thinking about this kind of thing again, because it's just explicitly, he's giving you the close reading. It's not you doing it and making it up. He is giving it to you. And he could recurse upon this. He could, in theory, write an essay where he breaks down even his descriptions again and gets deeper and deeper into them just to really try to help you. But there's a lot of depth in these concepts, or like to talk about love is the great wheel of the soul that sets all on going. That's not, I'm going to assume, I don't know this man, and I haven't even read the whole essay because I just started thinking about other stuff, but I don't think you write something like this after just hearing that at church over and over and over, even if they say it every day, which they don't. Like, I think some people may start to read Puritan writing and be like, oh yeah, they were just like religious zealots, and forget that to be a religious zealot implies kind of a crazy interior life that we all, as a result of the development of our culture, can barely even see. We barely even know that a human is capable of that. And so you project your own dullness onto all this other stuff you might encounter from history. But the word had so much, I think the word has a lot of power, but the word's power was a lot more clear before it became so informational and commodified in the past 100 years. So I'll read one more. Because in the beginning he says, meditation is a serious intention of the mind. That was an intention of the mind. Here is serious. Serious. Meditation is not a flourishing of a man's wit, but hath a set bout at the search of the truth, beats his brain, as we used to say, hammers out a business, as the goldsmith with his metal. He heats it and beats it, turns it on this side and then on that, fashions it on both, that he might frame it to his mind. Meditation is hammering of a truth or point propounded, that he may carry and conceive the frame and compass in his mind. Not salute a truth as we pass by on occasionally, but solemnly entertain it into our thoughts. Not look upon a thing presented as a spectator or passenger that goes by, but lay other things aside, and look at this as the work and employment for the present to take up our minds. It's one thing in our diet to take a snatch and away, another thing to make a meal, and sit at it on purpose until we have seen all set before us, and we have taken our fill of all. So we must not cast an eye or glimpse at the truth by some sudden or flighty apprehension. A snatch and away, but we must make a meal of musing. Therefore, the psalmist makes it the main trade that a godly man drives, professedly opposite to the carriage of the wicked, whether in his outward or inward work, in his disposition or expression of himself in his common practice, whereas they walk in the corrupt counsels of their own hearts, stand in the way of sinners, not only devise what is not, but practice and persevere in what they have devised, and sit in the seat of the scorners. A blessed man, his road, sorry, this is all written like in the same English it was written in at the time, so like lots of things are spelled differently. A blessed man, his road in which he travels, his set trade he meditates in the law of God day and night. That is the counsel in which he walks, the way in which he stands, the seat in which he sits. Look at this work as a branch of our Christian calling, not that which is left to our liberty, but which is of necessity to be attended, and that in good earnest as a Christian duty which God requires, not a little available to our spiritual welfare. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just so relevant, because that's kind of like we are in a, like, I'm not singling out other people and the way that they read, because we are in a culture of this where, or rather, I'm not singling them out as the only people who do it. I think like it is taking me a lot of work in order to open those parts of my mind based on just how I've developed in this particular cultural situation. And maybe people are much better adapted to it than me, but it seems to me that a lot of people are confused and suffering. So it would make us all just, I like, he says, we're not here to salute a truth as we pass by on occasionally. You know, that's how we're treating language. That's how we're treating existence itself. We're just like nodding at it and being like, oh yeah, well, you know, that, sure. And if you live like that, you just, I think it's a life that is not going to, it's a life lived for I don't know what, because I want to live a life that actually is helping people, like a life of love, essentially. Like I would like to create more of a culture of love by trying to bring that into the world around me. And to ignore these, like, and to do that requires this kind of work. Like I have to, as he puts it, hammer out a business as the goldsmith with his metal. He heats it and beats it and turns it on his side, and then on that fashions it on both, that he might frame it to his mind. Like there's, how much thinking do we do in our lives that feels like that? How much reading do we do in our lives that feels like that? How much communication do we do in our lives that feels like that, where we're really trying to, where we really want to reach someone or be reached by someone with our communication? So, all right, you know, I mean, I could read the whole thing, but I haven't read it yet, so anyway, yeah, no, I'll call it here. So no show for the rest of the week, and then, well, wait, let me wrap that right back to the title because I forgot that I titled this "Binding the Imaginary to the Real," and that's what it's all about. Is like doing this kind of work in the mind and developing our interiority and attention and ability to conceive language and experience, and to then, it's not that won't let us grasp the real, but that can begin to tie ourselves and our intentions onto the real implications of the situation that we live in. We can get back to reality only by those means, I think. So, all right. Yeah, all right. Well, yeah, no show this week, and I'll be back. I think I'm going to do a special stream on Sunday just to talk about George Washington's farewell address on his birthday. So I might do that, planning on it, but have a good week. All right.